Explain like I'm 5 how were kings not hacked in the olden days? Specifically, I'm talking about their signet rings, seals, etc. Couldn't someone just make a copy? Or make one that looks extremely similar? Imagine hacking the king. You could start wars or do whatever you wanted just by getting a letter sent somewhere. I understand it's not as easy as it sounds, and one would have to first obtain said seal or wax imprint from a letter or something, but I'm surprised I've never heard of it being done. Edit. Anyone else now wanna see a movie get made about someone or some team pulling off a heist like this? Obviously set back in the olden days. You probably could, but it's a lot of effort for what exactly? Start a war. How? Send a mean letter and the guy reading it is like, huh? That's weird. This letter didn't come from the usual courier. Isn't in Henry's handwriting and doesn't read like something he'd say. I'll reply back through the usual channels and see what's up. Or maybe, hey, I own this town now, see? I have a letter from the king. Sure bro. Sure you do. So, I'll be throwing you in the river now. Highly recommend posting this to our Ask Historians instead. You're getting a lot of armchair theorists giving theories with no actual evidence. There are several examples of official documents that are important parts of history that, on scientific examination, were found to have been tampered with and altered after the fact to push a certain narrative. I think that should tell you all you need to know. I rather suspect that the security of the seals, etc. were secondary and mostly ceremonial. The people carrying the messages were often trusted emissaries. Of course, that could and sometimes did backfire as well. Well, at the same time, you have to remember that most of the population was not literate. Even if you copied the seal, a difficult task with low risk-reward ratio, as others have said, most people would not be able to write an official-sounding document to which the seal would be affixed. Probably a lot more to be gained from learning how to open and reattach seals without damaging them, and then trading on the information within. One of the great rich monasteries of England wanted to prove to a medieval king that they had rights to own some contested land, so they provided a charter, signed by one of his long-past predecessors, and sealed with the royal seal. It wasn't until modern times that it was noticed that the seal provided wasn't real. It wasn't appropriate to that era. Henry VIII made that claim moot. Anyway, this is a good question, and a corollary would be, how would the viewer be able to positively identify the seal as the king's without having an authenticated imprint of the signet on file? I think that knowing the messenger would be very important as well. Signet rings and etc. were done by engravers. Every country usually had single-digit number of these craftsmen, who usually only had an equally small handful of students. Usually these craftsmen, engravers, painters, and weaponsmiths were not only guarded, but also watched and not allowed to leave their city or town of work, as them defecting or getting captured can have disastrous effects on currency and, like you said, false information. Also, a wax seal was intended to show that the letter had been unopened and the information was therefore secure. I imagine in a lot of instances, some trusted advisors in court probably secretly had their own copies of rings to allow them to intercept communications. So yeah, hacking in a sense. Regarding your edit, I've always wondered why we never got more stories like the Great Train Robbery, showcasing a heist from a bygone time period. I'd really love to see it become a genre. If you had modern-day technology, would you be able to forge a wax seal? Almost certainly not. The quickest and easiest way to have a 3D printer to scan the seal and 3D print one. And you have to have the knowledge and equipment to do so. How many people in your life do you know have that skill and tech? Now imagine you didn't have that. You need to reverse engineer a seal from a wax engraving and then make one by hand. The skill needed would only be a handful in a country. Throw in the fact they would be craftsmen of amazing skill. They would never need to go to criminal behavior to make money. Because there was a fear of death due to breaking laws. And then there was the fear of hell. Much of this is gone these days. Everyone thinks they're smart. Who says they weren't? You know how politics are big on image? They don't really care about the facts. They only care about what they look like. Let's play a game. Why do you believe that no one actually did hack the king? And that they didn't just snuff it under the rug every time it happened? To preserve their image. But I guess the lesson is you're playing a game where you can't find out 100 yourself. And you're reliant heavily on trust me, bro history. And that leaves you blind out there. The penalty for TGE forgery is death. Also, the craftsmanship on these items are insane. It would take an expert artisan multiple years to make. It is not easy to make a forgery without a lengthy process. It actually happened a bit. I've seen an example documented while reading some of the archives from Lucca, Italy. Their roving magistrates had to hold court cases due to fraud in the outlying provinces. Currency fraud. And some of the CEOs and signets you're talking about. Yeah, putting aside the skilled tradesmen it would take to accomplish this, along with getting a copy of the impression. I am fairly certain the fact that certain death would be the outcome of such actions dissuaded such endeavors. They didn't have trails back then. It would be more like a knight, a sheriff, or some other person presenting your severed head to the king and handing the king the counterfeit signet ring. If the perpetrator had any claim to heredity or lands, they would have been stripped from his family. Not too much to gain and a lot to lose. Edit. Anyone else now wanna see a movie get made about someone or some team pulling off a heist like this? Obviously set back in the olden days. If memory serves, Hamlet replaces a sealed letter ordering his own execution with one ordering the execution of his wacky pals Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Charlemagne signed his royal documents thus. There was a cipher, a cute symbol drawn of Kr. for Carolus Rex Charles the King. His Majesty would then take a pen and draw a vertical stroke down the center, making it Kr. Carolus Holy Cross Rex. No one dared cheat this system, at least that we know of. Charles was too dreaded. You would need to train to be able to impersonate the messenger as they deliver the letter on behalf of the writer. After you manage that, you would need to make the copy yourself, or trust someone else to make or get you a copy, without attracting attention. This would only be done by a handful of people. It would be very hard to do, because the one caught doing it got hacked back in the public square, with a block and axe. And they weren't pussies about cruel and unusual then. It was a party where the crowd tried to make it even worse for them. High risk, little reward. Everything was done manually back then. You can't forge a signature then get a castle. If you get caught, you and your family gets executed. Not worth. This is among the reasons messengers were valued. You knew it was the king's order because the guy delivering it to you was the king's personal messenger. Also, written messages were less common than portrayed in media. Paper was expensive for what it is and the messenger could just memorize what you said. This also created an odd shell game where written messages were often not the real message, or were delivered with the specific knowledge they would be seen by others, or any number of other subterfuges. They were. Why do you think signet rings were invented in the first place? Forgers have existed as long as money, power, and centralized governmental power